Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into something really fascinating, I think. A huge challenge for any big organization, really. How do you, if you're leading strategy, actually navigate a future that's just so uncertain, always shifting, often totally unpredictable? It's not just reacting, is it? It's about trying to actively shape where you're going. So today, we're focusing on these strategic frameworks companies use, how they look ahead, anticipate big challenges, and crucially, manage potential crises. Our insight's coming from Carmen Ricardo. She works on long-term strategy for a massive global oil company. So real frontline stuff. Our mission for you listening in is to unpack not just what people like Carmen do, but really how they do it. How do they guess what competitors are up to, foresee these huge social and economic shifts, and manage all the risks that come with operating globally? We'll get into scenario planning. Futurology sounds a bit sci-fi, but it isn't. And then the very practical side of risk management.
Yeah, and I think what's really key here is that understanding this stuff isn't just for strategists in big companies. It's actually fundamental for anyone trying to navigate, the complex world we're in. Whether you're thinking about your own career, or maybe scaling a business, or just making sense of what's happening politically, these are really the tools for understanding the unknown, for building resilience. Personally, professionally, it doesn't matter. It's about learning to think like a futurist.
Okay, great point. Let's start with that first big pillar then. Scenario planning. Carmen Ricardo highlights this. She says, and I'm quoting her here, "My job is to contribute to long-term plans for our future activities." She goes on, "We have to anticipate competitors' activities as well as trends in the general social and economic environment. We have to be ready to respond to changes in society and changes in the economy as a whole." This is called scenario planning. So it's clear she's not talking about one single future, right? It's explicitly about multiple possibilities.
Precisely. That's the absolute core of it. Scenario planning isn't prediction. It's about rigorously imagining several plausible futures. Her team, she says, imagine ways in which the energy industry might change and evolve, and the place of oil in relation to alternative fuels in 20, 50, or 100 years from now. That's a long view. And doing that forces them away from just, one comfortable forecast, which is probably biased anyway. Instead, they build out these detailed stories, maybe one where renewables just take off completely, or another where, say, carbon capture becomes really effective, giving fossil fuels a longer life, or maybe geopolitical chaos completely changes energy flows.
See, so it's less like trying to guess the winning lottery ticket.
Yeah, exactly.
And more like creating strategic dress rehearsals for different plays that might unfold. So if they think about how oil might compete with, advanced hydrogen in 50 years, they can start making investments now that make sense across a few of those potential futures, instead of being totally wrong-footed if one specific thing happens.
Exactly right. And I think for an audience like ours, the real insight from scenario planning isn't just seeing different futures laid out. It's realizing how few of your current assumptions, the things you think are solid, actually hold true across all those plausible futures. That forces a kind of strategic humility, and that's where agility really starts. It makes the organization question its core beliefs about markets, customers, technology. It reveals vulnerabilities you just wouldn't see otherwise. It's about building flexibility right into the core of how they operate.
That makes a lot of sense. Developing strategic muscles, kind of. But is there a risk of just getting stuck? Analysis paralysis? If you're imagining dozens of futures, how do you actually use that? How do you decide which ones matter enough to plan for and which are, just noise?
That's a really good question. And that's where the art comes in with the science. Good scenario planners don't try to map every single possibility. That's impossible. Instead, they focus on a few critical uncertainties, those big factors that are both really impactful and really uncertain. Then they build maybe 3, 4, 5 scenarios around those critical points. They need to be different, plausible, and challenging. The goal isn't to cover everything. It's to create distinct mental maps that really push current thinking and reveal different strategic needs. It's about leverage, not just volume.
Right, strategic leverage.
Okay.
So exploring diverse futures builds resilience, which leads us nicely into this related, maybe even more intriguing idea, futurology. Carmen calls herself a kind of futurologist or futurist, admits it's not an exact science or like gazing into a crystal ball,
Yeah.
but then she insists there are ways of predicting the future in a structured manner. How do those two things fit together? It sounds a bit like a contradiction.
Well, it does sound like one, but it's not, really. Futurology, yeah, it's not a crystal ball, definitely not. But it's also not just wild guessing. It uses structured methods designed specifically to bring some rigor to looking ahead. It tries to get beyond just one person's intuition. Carmen mentions a classic example, the Delphi method. It's actually a brilliant technique for tapping into collective expertise without falling into the trap of, groupthink.
Okay, the Delphi method. I think we've probably all heard that term. But for anyone who hasn't really dug into it, how does it actually work? And what are the maybe hidden difficulties in using it well for a huge company like Carmen's?
Okay, so the basics are you get a panel of experts on a topic, but crucially, they work independently. They don't meet. They don't know who else is on the panel sometimes. This stops, like the loudest voice dominating or people just agreeing to keep the peace. They each make their forecast. Then, those forecasts are collected, anonymized, and shared with everyone in the group. Then each expert gets to see what others thought, comment on it, and usually revise their own forecast. And you repeat that process, maybe 2 or 3 rounds. The idea is to move towards a more refined consensus, or at least understand clearly where the disagreements lie and why. But you're right to ask about challenges. For an informed audience, the tricky parts aren't just sending emails back and forth. It's framing the questions really carefully to avoid leading people. It's skillfully pulling together the feedback so it leads to genuine refinement, not just watering everything down. And maybe most importantly, it's choosing the right experts. You need diverse views, deep knowledge, but you have to avoid accidentally picking a group that all thinks the same way anyway. They might miss the really disruptive signals. Getting those nuances right is what makes it powerful, not just a glorified survey.
That sounds incredibly systematic, almost deceptively complex to do well.
Yeah.
But does aiming for consensus, even a refined one, risk filtering out the really radical ideas, the out there thinking that might actually be needed for a truly disruptive future? Does that refinement process tend to average away the most visionary, maybe initially unpopular insights?
That's a very sharp point, and it's a known tension with any consensus method. A well-run Delphi process tries to handle this. It specifically allows for experts to articulate why they disagree, even if the majority is heading elsewhere. Those dissenting opinions and the reasons for them are captured. They aren't just ignored. So the goal isn't always total agreement. Sometimes it's about getting a really robust map of the range of expert views, including the outliers. Sometimes, honestly, the most valuable insight comes from the person who doesn't agree and can explain exactly why.
Okay, that makes sense. You capture the dissent, too. So we've got scenario planning for diverse futures, futurology for structured predictions. But having these views of the future is one thing. The next step is crucial, turning that foresight into defense. How do you protect against the things you now think might happen? And that's where risk management comes in, which Carmen calls a related area. What are some of the really big, maybe even extreme risks that her company has to think about?
Yeah, risk management is basically about systematically finding, assessing, and then trying to lessen potential threats. Carmen gives some pretty stark examples, one of the most extreme. Operating in politically unstable countries. The danger there could literally be the government deciding to nationalize your assets. Just take them over. That's obviously a huge financial blow, but it also fundamentally threatens their ability to operate globally, their investments.
The direct hit, yeah. But she also mentions reputation, which feels, I don't know, less concrete, but maybe even more critical today.
Absolutely. She points out, quote, "We may be accused of working with governments which people do not approve of." Now, this isn't about losing equipment. It's about damage to the company's reputation for social responsibility. And this really highlights something crucial about modern risk, doesn't it? Sometimes the biggest threat isn't a market crash. It's a sudden, maybe irreversible loss of public trust. In our world, with instant information, social media, public perception on ethics, on values, can be incredibly damaging long-term. Maybe more than a direct financial loss sometimes. It affects hiring, market access, everything.
And then thinking about an oil company, there's the obvious one. Environmental risk. That must be constant.
Oh, absolutely. Carmen specifically mentions the danger of oil spills from ships transporting our oil. It's not theoretical for them. It's a real, ever-present danger with potentially horrific consequences. She talks about the immediate costs, resulting pollution and associated costs of fines, cleaning up, etc., which are, massive. But then she adds, and this is key, in addition, there is the much greater long-term cost of the negative effect this has on our image, the way the company is perceived. She calls a badly handled spill a public relations disaster. It shows perfectly how one event triggers this cascade, right? Environmental risk leads to financial, legal, and massive reputational risk, all feeding each other.
That's a powerful connection. Not just the cleanup bill, but that lasting damage to their image.
Yeah.
Years, maybe decades, to recover, if ever. What about internal stuff, like their own systems failing? Operational risks.
She covers that too. Mentions things like our computer systems are damaged, for example, in a fire. That could just hold everything. So to counter that, they have business continuity plans involving backup machines on another site so that we can carry on working normally. That's classic operational resilience planning, making sure core functions keep going even if part of the system breaks. These are all, as she says, potential crises. And she emphasizes they need contingency plans or crisis management plans for all the risks we can think of. It's like building layers of defense against the unknown.
It really drives home the point, doesn't it? These concepts, futurology, scenario planning, they sound academic, maybe a bit abstract. But they're not just exercises. They are absolutely vital business functions. They directly connect to the bottom line, to operating day to day, to how the company is seen in the world. From imagining these broad futures to making structured predictions, to actively managing the very real threats. Preparing for tomorrow is way more complex, more structured than just guessing.
You've nailed the core insight there perfectly. Preparing for the future isn't about having a perfect crystal ball. It's not even about getting specific predictions right every time. It's really about building these robust, structured processes for looking ahead and building in strategic resilience. The real value, as Carmen's work shows, is in the process itself. That disciplined thinking, that foresight work, it builds adaptability. It builds strength right into the organization. That lets them pivot, protect themselves, maybe even find opportunities when things get unpredictable. It's this structured approach that helps them navigate everything from, the huge question of energy evolution oil versus alternatives over 20, 1,500 years, to using expert methods like Delphi for forecasts and managing concrete risks like nationalization or reputational hits from working with tricky governments or, God forbid, oil spills and the fallout. And even internal stuff like making sure they have backups if their computers go down. They're all connected. It's a whole web of strategic intelligence guarding the future.
And it absolutely proves that even things that sound theoretical have incredibly powerful practical uses in protecting a company's future, its finances, its reputation. These are really the tools for survival and maybe even thriving when the world keeps changing.
Which actually leads me to a final thought, something maybe for you to ponder. Given how fast everything is changing now, technology, society, how might these very methods, scenario planning, futurology, how might they need to change or evolve to stay effective? And maybe more intriguingly, what completely new kinds of crises might be lurking out there? Things driven by AI maybe, or quantum computing, or even stuff like deep space resources. Things we haven't even started thinking about planning for today.
Wow, that is definitely something to think about. A really mind-bending question to end on. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into how some of the world's biggest players try to prepare for what's next. Keep exploring, keep questioning. We'll catch you next time.